When Elena Dorsey bought her dream home in the exclusive gated community of Whispering Pines, she thought she was escaping grief, not stepping into war. But from the moment she moved in, she was watched, judged, targeted. And when her 10-year-old daughter was nearly killed in a so-called accident, Elena realized the truth. This wasn't just about grass height or mailbox color. This was a neighborhood with secrets, and someone was willing to destroy lives to keep them buried. What they didn't know was that Elena had come here to heal, and now she was ready to fight. The air in Whispering Pines smelled like fresh-cut grass and quiet repression. Elena Dorsey rolled her suitcase across the smooth stone path toward her new home, a modest 2-story house with a white porch and blue shutters. It was smaller than what she had before, back in Charleston with her late husband, but it was hers now, just hers and Madeline's. A new beginning. The neighborhood was spotless. Every house had a nearly identical manicured lawn. The flower beds bloomed in matching symmetry. Not a weed, not a scrap of paper, not a hair out of place. It felt too perfect. Almost unnervingly so. Madeline, her 10-year-old daughter, jumped out of the car and spun in the driveway, her curly ponytail swinging with excitement. "It looks like the houses in those movies," she said, "like no one ever argues here." Elena smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She had read about the Whispering Pines, HOA, before buying. Strict? Yes, but also efficient. She thought she could handle a few rules. After all, she had worked in law. Regulations didn't scare her. People did. The first letter came 3 days after they moved in. A friendly notice slipped into their mailbox, printed on heavy cream paper with gold trim. "Dear Ms. Dorsey, your porch flower arrangement exceeds regulation dimensions and disrupts visual uniformity. Kindly remove or resize by Friday to avoid penalty." Elena raised an eyebrow. She looked at the small potted sunflowers Madeline had planted with such pride. They were barely knee-high. She shook her head, but complied. A week later came another letter, this time about her curtains not being community white. She hadn't even realized white came in more than one approved shade. Then came a citation for Madeline skateboarding on the sidewalk, which, according to Rule 7b, was considered recreational disturbance. Elena began to feel it, like eyes were constantly on them, as if someone was always watching, waiting. At the monthly HOA meeting, she decided to introduce herself. She entered the clubhouse, where folding chairs were set in perfect rows like a church. The room fell silent as she walked in. At the front sat a tall, silver-haired woman with a red folder and a gavel. Beverly March, the president. She looked Elena up and down before plastering on a thin smile. "You must be our new neighbor. I do hope you found our guidelines clear." Elena extended a hand. "Mostly, though I admit the curtain rule caught me off guard." The smile on Beverly's face flickered. Whispering Pines takes aesthetic cohesion seriously. It's why this community remains so refined. Elena sat down quietly, but she could feel the tension prickling under her skin. She looked around at the other attendees. No one met her gaze, except one older man in the back, white beard, dark sweater, quiet eyes. He nodded once. That was it. By the time the meeting ended, Elena had been handed 3 more reminders, one of them noting that her recycling bins were not returned to the garage within 75 minutes of pickup. It all seemed absurd, petty, but also calculated. Her house was one of the few with a biracial family. She noticed the pattern. The only other family of color, a Filipino nurse with a husband in the military, had their front garden removed by order of ground uniformity. Elena sat on her porch that evening, staring at the perfect street, the perfect hedges, the perfect silence, and she felt something she hadn't felt since the funeral, a fire in her chest. a warning. She thought she had moved here to heal, but maybe Whispering Pines wasn't built for healing. Maybe it was built to hide things behind all the white paint and clipped hedges. And Elena Dorsey was never good at pretending everything was fine. It was after the 5th violation notice that Elena stopped trying to be polite. The letter was about the placement of her trash bins. Again. This time, it accused her of deliberately diminishing neighborhood value through negligence. She stared at the gold-trimmed paper and felt something break inside her. The bins had been out for barely an hour. She had been working late on a freelance legal brief and didn't hear the truck until noon. It was absurd. But what bothered her most was the tone, formal, sterile, but saturated with something uglier beneath the words. It wasn't about bins. It was about control. That afternoon, while Madeline sat in the living room sketching unicorns in her notebook, Elena poured herself a coffee and sat down with the HOA bylaws. She hadn't read them in detail before. She'd only skimmed, trusting the usual fine print. But now she dove in. The deeper she went, the more unsettled she became. The language was vague in places, but unusually specific in others. There were clauses giving the board power to fine, to ban residents from common areas, even to place liens on homes over unpaid violations. Worse, there had been multiple revisions, some within the last year, and those revisions didn't appear to have been voted on properly. Elena opened her laptop and started cross-referencing dates. Something wasn't right. According to the HOA charter, any changes to the rules required majority resident approval, but meeting minutes were vague or missing entirely. Many of the changes had gone into effect quietly, without notice. She made a spreadsheet and highlighted the patterns. New residents, especially those who weren't white, were overwhelmingly fined within their first month. Many had left within 6. Elena felt a chill run through her. Later that evening, as she was loading dishes, she heard a knock at the back door. Strange, since everyone always used the front. She opened it to find the older man from the HOA meeting standing on her porch, hunched slightly, a wool cap pulled low over his forehead. "Ms. Dorsey?" he asked. "Yes, I'm Jasper Langley. I live 2 blocks over on Birchwood. I saw you at the meeting, and I know what you're dealing with." Elena narrowed her eyes, but opened the door wider. "Come in." He shook his head. "I won't stay long. Just wanted to give you this." He reached into his coat and handed her a flash drive. It was small, black, and unmarked. "What's on it?" "Proof. I collected things over the years. I tried to fight them once. Didn't work. But maybe you'll have better luck." Before she could ask more, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like he hadn't been there at all. Elena sat at her desk and plugged the drive into her laptop. It was full. Dozens of folders labeled with years: 2016, 2017, 2019. Inside were audio files, scanned letters, internal emails, even photographs of board members dining with real estate agents and bank officers. One folder contained a recording labeled Private Board March 2021.mp3. Elena clicked it. Voices crackled through her speakers. "I just don't think we can keep letting this place turn into a melting pot," a woman said. "You're right, Bev," came another voice. "We have a standard to maintain. If they don't fit the image, they don't belong." Elena froze. Bev, as in Beverly March. She leaned back, stunned. She wasn't imagining it. This wasn't about trash bins or curtains or skateboards. It was targeted, organized. Whispers behind hedges and smiles full of poison. And the worst part? It had worked on others before her. Jasper had said so. A single mom in 2009. Mysterious liens. Forced to move out. Elena stared at the screen, rage pulsing in her throat. She thought she had moved into a quiet neighborhood with strict rules. Instead, she had moved into a machine designed to silence people like her, but she was not the type to be silenced. She created a folder on her desktop and named it WAR. Then she copied every file from the flash drive into it. She didn't know yet how far it would go or who she could trust, but she did know this: Beverly March had picked the wrong woman. The next morning, Elena awoke with a strange sense of clarity. For weeks, she had second-guessed herself, wondering if she was imagining the hostility. But now, she had proof, cold, undeniable proof, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. As she packed Madeline's lunch, she noticed her daughter was unusually quiet. "Everything okay, Mads?" Elena asked gently. Madeline shrugged. "Some girls at the bus stop were whispering. When I got on the bus, they said we're the reason the neighborhood's going downhill." She hesitated, then added, "One of them said her mom heard it at the meeting." Elena crouched beside her, hands trembling with anger. "Listen to me, baby. None of this is your fault. In this neighborhood, it's not falling apart, it's waking up. And sometimes people hate that." Madeline nodded slowly, but Elena could see the fear in her eyes. After the bus pulled away, Elena reached out to someone she hadn't spoken to in years, Travis Greer. They'd been in law school together, and while their careers had taken different turns, Travis had built a reputation as a sharp, relentless civil rights attorney. She sent him a message with a few of the documents and audio clips. He called within the hour. "This is massive," Travis said, "but it's going to get ugly. They'll try to discredit you, maybe even threaten you. I'm not afraid of HOA bullies." "You should be. You're stepping into a system designed to protect itself." "Then let's tear it down," Elena replied. That night, they spoke for hours. Travis explained what they'd need: multiple testimonies, evidence that showed a pattern of discrimination and financial misconduct. Elena promised to start collecting everything she could. But the moment she hung up, a loud thud hit her porch. She ran outside and found a dead bird nailed to a piece of cardboard with a typed note beneath it: "Your kind doesn't belong here." Her stomach turned. It wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was hate, real and dangerous. The next day, Elena began reaching out to other residents, starting cautiously with people she'd seen walking alone or looking uncomfortable during meetings. Some shut their doors, some whispered apologies and said they couldn't help, but others, like Camila Reyes, a nurse from 3 streets over, invited her in. Camila's eyes welled up as she shared her story. Her family had been fined for a decorative religious display during Christmas, an ofrenda honoring her late mother. Her husband, who was deployed at the time, had received a letter threatening foreclosure if the unauthorized shrine wasn't removed. Then came the Jacobs, an interracial couple who were fined over their backyard grill being too visible, and were later banned from the community BBQ for unauthorized propane use. Elena recorded every story with consent, compiling them one by one. As the file grew, so did her fear. Someone was watching. One afternoon, she noticed a white SUV parked across the street, engine running but never moving. When she walked toward it, it sped off. Then came the notice that Madeline was no longer permitted to use the community pool. The reason? Excessive splashing and unapproved swimwear. Elena stood outside the pool gate, gripping the paper with white knuckles, while Madeline cried beside her. That night, Elena opened the WAR folder again. She started a new section: retaliation. Every incident went into a spreadsheet: the bird, the SUV, the notices. And then she added a new name to her contacts list: Caleb Monroe. He was a local investigative journalist, famous for a series of exposés on zoning corruption and housing bias. Elena had read his articles before. He was sharp, fair, and unafraid. She sent him a short email: "I live in Whispering Pines. I have a story you'll want. It's bigger than you think." His response came within minutes: "I'm listening." Elena stared at the screen, her jaw clenched. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, but she knew this. The HOA had built its kingdom on silence, fear, and isolation. She was going to break all three. And this time, she wasn't alone. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of golden, windless day where everything felt briefly normal. Elena was home preparing a batch of Madeline's favorite lemon cookies when her phone rang. It was the school nurse. Her voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Dorsey, there's been an incident. Madeline's okay, but she's being taken to urgent care. She was in an accident. Her bike caught something on the sidewalk, and she crashed." Elena dropped the mixing bowl and grabbed her keys. Her hands trembled the entire drive. When she arrived at the clinic, Madeline was lying on a gurney with a splinted wrist and 6 stitches above her eyebrow. Her face was pale, eyes dazed. "Mama, I didn't see it. There was this wire. I was riding fast and then I just flew." Elena's breath caught. "What do you mean, wire?" It was across the sidewalk, like pulled tight between the stop sign and the fence post. The nurse, overhearing, looked horrified. "That sounds deliberate. Did anyone report this?" Elena filed a police report within the hour. An officer walked the area with her and confirmed there were faint indentations on the stop sign and fence post, as if something had recently been tied between them. But without video evidence or a witness, it would be hard to pursue criminal charges. They classified it as suspicious mischief. Elena wasn't satisfied. That night, she reviewed every file in the WAR folder. She searched for anything at all, that hinted at this level of hostility. The most she'd found before was intimidation, not violence. But this was an escalation, and someone had to pay. The next morning, Elena sat down with Caleb Monroe at a downtown cafe. He was younger than she expected. Early 30s, sharp eyes, and a worn leather satchel full of notes. She slid a printed packet across the table. Audio files, HOA documents, testimonials, photos, and a copy of the police report from Madeline's crash. When Caleb finished skimming the first few pages, he looked up with disbelief. "You've been sitting on this how long?" "Too long. This is massive. You know that, right? What you're handing me could trigger federal investigations, maybe even DOJ attention if the bias is systemic." Elena sipped her coffee. "It is systemic, and it's rotting from the inside out." Caleb didn't waste time. Within 3 days, his article went live under the headline, "Whispering Pines or Whispering Prejudice? Inside the HOA that's punishing families for existing." It spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares, dozens of angry comments. Local news stations picked it up. Interviews were requested. Talk radio hosts weighed in. For the first time, Beverly March's name was dragged into public light, not as a beloved community leader, but as a woman presiding over an empire of quiet cruelty. Reporters showed up outside the gates. News vans parked near the clubhouse. Neighbors peeked through curtains, unsure whether to hide or cheer. Elena, meanwhile, kept digging. She'd always suspected the HOA's obsession with fines wasn't just about control. It was about money. She filed a public record request with the county clerk and got access to the Whispering Pines HOA's financial disclosures. What she found was staggering. Over $400,000 in community funds had been allocated over 5 years to contractors with no listed business names. Landscaping companies that didn't exist. Repairs on non-existent water damage. Administrative bonuses paid out to board members. It was fraud. Bold, unapologetic fraud. She forwarded the documents to Travis, who was already assembling a class action suit. He called her that night. "Elena, this isn't just HOA abuse. This is criminal." "I know. They're going to come after you now, all the way. I'm ready." The next day, she walked Madeline to school herself. Not because she didn't trust the bus, but because she wanted the neighbors to see her, to know she wasn't going anywhere. At the school gate, Madeline squeezed her hand. "Is it bad that I want them to be scared now?" Elena knelt down and looked her daughter in the eyes. "Not scared, sweetheart. Just exposed. And somewhere, behind a curtain, Elena knew Beverly was watching. But this time, the silence wasn't protection. It was fear. The legal papers were served on a Tuesday morning. Beverly March was halfway through a croissant at the Whispering Pines clubhouse when a courier walked straight into the meeting room and handed her the thick envelope. Every board member present froze. Beverly tried to maintain her composure, but Elena could see the subtle twitch in her left cheek. Elena had been invited as a guest to that meeting. Beverly had likely hoped to intimidate her with public condescension. Instead, Elena sat calmly with her laptop open, watching every expression, every tremble. The lawsuit, spearheaded by Travis Greer and supported by 10 other families, alleged civil rights violations, discriminatory enforcement, financial fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The attached exhibits included audio recordings, testimony, financial inconsistencies, and photographic evidence. Travis had gone all in. Elena admired that about him. He didn't just aim to win, he aimed to dismantle. Beverly's voice cracked as she attempted to read a prepared statement about malicious defamation, but she never made it past the second sentence. Cameras from a local news crew had gathered just outside the clubhouse windows. One of the HOA board members, David Trant, abruptly stood up and walked out. Elena noted it. He was the first to break. That same night, Travis held a town hall at the local community center, separate from the HOA. Over 50 residents attended. Elena was shocked to see so many faces she barely recognized, neighbors who had always smiled politely but never spoken more than a few words. One by one, hands began to raise. Hands. A black couple who'd been fined $250 for excessive smoke during a backyard barbecue. A single mother who had her fence repainted 3 times after Beverly's repeated complaints about the color not being within palate range. A retired veteran who'd received citations for leaving his walker on the front porch. The stories poured out like floodwater after a dam had broken. What had once been quiet, isolated shame became a collective roar. Travis stood at the front, taking notes, asking questions, organizing claims. But it was Elena who people kept looking at, with quiet gratitude, with trust. Still, Elena knew the HOA wouldn't go down without a fight. The very next day, she received a formal letter from the Whispering Pines legal committee, signed by Beverly herself, accusing her of breaching HOA confidentiality, trespassing on association property, and inciting civil unrest. The letter demanded she cease hostile activities or face further legal consequences. Elena read it once, twice, then laughed. She scanned the letter and emailed it directly to Caleb Monroe. Within hours, he published a follow-up article titled, HOA Sues Whistleblower Mom. But the community is fighting back. It ignited a media frenzy. HOA abuse survivors from all over the state started sharing their stories online under the hashtag #NotJustMyNeighborhood. Lawyers reached out offering pro bono support. Civil rights groups issued statements. The story had evolved from a local scandal into a statewide reckoning, but the final blow came from someone no one expected. Jasper Langley, the quiet, stooped man who had first handed Elena the flash drive, appeared in court to submit an affidavit, and in doing so, revealed who he truly was, a retired federal judge, one with a long history of involvement in housing justice cases. His testimony was direct, devastating, and unimpeachable. He declared that the Whispering Pines HOA had operated as a private enforcement mechanism of exclusionary bias and had repeatedly violated both state and federal law. He outlined with clinical detail how such systems manipulated ordinances to maintain racial and economic segregation. The courtroom was stunned. Even the defense lawyers sat slack-jawed. As reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, Jasper simply tipped his hat to Elena and said, I've been waiting a long time for someone like you." Inside the courtroom, Beverly sat still, her face pale and unreadable. Her empire was collapsing around her, and she had no one left to protect her. That evening, an emergency HOA board meeting was announced. For the first time in the neighborhood's history, residents would vote on whether to dissolve the current board and call for a new election. Elena received several calls asking her to run for president. She politely declined. "I didn't do this to take power," she said. "I did it to return it to the people who live here." Instead, she nominated Harriet Voss, a soft-spoken former teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, but had never once been asked to speak at a meeting. Harriet accepted, her voice shaking as she said, "We thought we had to be silent to survive here, but now maybe we can speak and still belong." The vote was unanimous. Beverly was officially removed. And Elena? She walked home through Whispering Pines with her daughter's hand in hers, not as an outsider, but as a symbol of what the neighborhood could be. 2 weeks after the board was officially dissolved, Whispering Pines felt like it had exhaled for the first time in years. The tension that used to linger in the air like humidity had lifted, though not entirely. Change had begun, but trust was still fragile. Some neighbors avoided eye contact with Elena, unsure whether to thank her or fear her. Others brought over flowers, thank you cards, or casseroles wrapped in foil, each one a quiet apology. But Elena didn't want gratitude. She wanted accountability. The transition period was messy. Records had to be reviewed, finances audited, and protocols rewritten. Harriet Voss, now acting president of the HOA, called for full transparency. Elena volunteered to help from the outside, acting as a community liaison rather than taking any official role. She wanted the residents to speak freely without feeling like she was watching over them. But the unease that had been simmering in Elena didn't go away. She still hadn't found out who had strung the wire that nearly injured her daughter beyond repair. Every step forward felt like a victory on the surface, but underneath it was a wound that hadn't yet closed. Then Jasper called. "I think you should see this," he said. "Come by." Elena drove to his house, a quaint cottage at the end of Birchwood Lane. Inside, Jasper led her to a small office with rows of boxes and shelves filled with labeled folders. "I pulled security footage from my external camera system," he said. "Turns out one of my side lenses catches the stop sign at the end of your street." He clicked play. The timestamp was from the night before Madeline's accident. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. A tall figure wearing a hoodie approached the sidewalk with something coiled in his hand. He tied it low between the metal pole and fence post, yanked it taut, then disappeared into the shadows. Jasper zoomed in, paused, and enhanced the frame. The face wasn't visible, but the posture, the gait, it was familiar. Then Jasper opened another folder on his computer. "Same guy vandalized my mailbox last fall," he said. "I didn't report it then because I was tired of fighting ghosts. But now, I think we know who it is." He clicked one final file, a screenshot. The figure caught briefly under a motion sensor light. It was Clay March, Beverly's only son. Elena stared at the screen in stunned silence. Clay had always been quiet, always lurking around meetings, usually standing in the background near the refreshment table. He'd never spoken directly to her, but she'd seen him smirk during those early board meetings. She remembered thinking he looked like someone who had never been told no. She reported the footage to the police immediately. With this new evidence, the case was reopened, and within a few days, officers arrived at the March residence with a warrant. Clay was arrested for reckless endangerment, tampering with public property, and aggravated harassment of a minor. Beverly, now stripped of power and influence, tried to intervene, yelling at officers, demanding they stop. But no one listened. Not anymore. At the arraignment, Elena sat in the front row with Madeline beside her, When Clay was brought into the courtroom, he looked stunned to see them there. His lawyer tried to paint the act as a juvenile prank, but the judge wasn't moved. Not when faced with the video, the history, and the fact that a child had nearly suffered permanent damage. Then something unexpected happened. The judge asked if anyone wished to speak before the sentencing. Elena stood. I moved to Whispering Pines for peace. I thought the rules were strict, but fair. I thought this was a place where my daughter could grow up safely. I didn't know I was walking into a machine built to exclude and punish. What Clay did was not a prank. It was an act of violence rooted in the culture that this HOA encouraged, one of fear, superiority, and silence. My daughter is lucky to be alive, but no child should have to be lucky to be safe in their own neighborhood. She paused, then added, I forgive him, but I won't forget, and I won't stop until places like this are made safe for everyone's children. The courtroom was still. The judge gave Clay a suspended sentence and community service, but ordered mandatory psychological counseling and restitution to Elena's family. Beverly sat frozen in the back, her world shattered beyond repair. That evening, Whispering Pines was quiet. No cameras, no watchers. Just a neighborhood finally trying to figure out how to be human again. Elena tucked Madeline into bed and kissed her forehead. Are you proud of me? She whispered. Madeline looked up with sleepy eyes and said, I'm proud of us. For the first time in months, Elena allowed herself to breathe deeply. Justice wasn't perfect, but tonight it had arrived. It was early spring when the new HOA bylaws were posted. No longer written in dense legalese or cloaked in ambiguous language. They were simple, fair, and translated into 3 languages. The phrase, in the interest of aesthetic harmony, had been scrubbed completely. Elena stood near the bulletin board outside the clubhouse, reading every word, even though she had already helped draft them with Harriet and several other volunteers. The air was warm, and birds chirped like they were part of the announcement. But Elena couldn't relax. There was still one more thing she had to do. Madeline had nightmares for weeks after the courtroom. Some nights she would cry quietly, not wanting to wake her mother, but Elena always heard. On one of those nights, Madeline whispered, What if they still hate us? Just quietly now. It stayed with Elena more than anything else, because she knew the system they had fought wasn't built on overt hate. It was built on the silent kind, the kind that smiled at you while filing a complaint about your garden, the kind that said, We're just trying to protect our property values. She had uncovered the rot, but there was still healing to be done. So, she started something new. She called it the Whispering Pines Listening Circle. Every Sunday evening, a group of residents gathered in the clubhouse, not to legislate, not to vote, but simply to talk about what the neighborhood had become, what it had been, and what it could be. At first, only 5 people showed up, then 10, then 20. A Latina mother who had lived in silence for 7 years spoke about how she had once been fined for hanging her grandmother's quilt. A teenager admitted he'd always felt uncomfortable bringing his friends over. An elderly white man confessed he had voted for Beverly's rules for years because it felt safer that way, but now realized what he'd helped enable. No one yelled, no one accused, they just listened. Meanwhile, Clay March had begun his community service. He was ordered to clean park benches, repaint curbs, and help repair the broken sidewalks, including the one where Madeline had fallen. Elena hadn't expected to see him that day, but she did. She was driving back from the grocery store when she noticed him kneeling by the stop sign, scraping paint from the base. She pulled over. Clay looked up, instantly tense, but Elena didn't yell. She didn't even speak right away. She just stepped out of the car and walked toward him until they stood face to face. You almost took my daughter from me, she said quietly. You could have destroyed her life. Mine too. Clay looked away. I know. Do you? He hesitated, then nodded. I was angry. I thought people like you were ruining what my mom built. I didn't even realize what that meant until court. I just saw her power slipping, and I didn't know who I was without it. Elena studied his face. For the first time, she didn't see smugness or arrogance. She saw confusion. A young man untangling a lifetime of poison fed to him as tradition. I don't forgive you because it was a mistake, she said. I forgive you because I refuse to let your mistake become my legacy. Clay blinked, stunned. He opened his mouth to respond, but she was already walking away. That night, Madeline drew a picture. 2 houses, side by side, one with brown shutters, one with white. In the middle stood 2 girls holding sunflowers. When Elena asked about it, Madeline said, "It's us and the new neighbors. I hope they have a little girl too." Elena smiled, because tomorrow the house that once belonged to Beverly March was going on the market. Rumor had it, a black couple from Atlanta was moving in, with twin toddlers and a Labrador. The old guard was leaving, a new chapter was beginning, and Elena was finally starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, Whispering Pines had a future worth fighting for. The sun was rising over Whispering Pines as moving trucks pulled into the driveway of the old March estate. Elena stood on her porch with a cup of coffee in hand, watching quietly as the new family began unloading their life, box by box, toy by toy. The man, tall and bearded, laughed as he lifted a pink tricycle out of the back. A woman in a vibrant yellow blouse held a toddler on her hip while giving directions to the movers. There was a warmth in their movements, the kind of joy not often seen in this neighborhood, not before. Madeline tugged on Elena's sleeve, barefoot and still in her pajamas. "Should we bring something?" she asked. Elena smiled. "What do you think?" 10 minutes later, they were walking down the street, Madeline holding a single sunflower wrapped in ribbon. As they approached the new neighbors, the woman turned and knelt to Madeline's level. "Well, hello, sweetheart," she said. "Are you here to say hi?" Madeline held out the flower. "This is for your new garden. It's a brave flower." The woman blinked, then chuckled softly. "Well, I think it's perfect." Elena extended her hand. "Welcome to Whispering Pines. I'm Elena, and this is my daughter Madeline. If you ever need anything, or if you ever get a letter about your mailbox being 2 inches off, we're just down the street." The couple laughed. "I'm Simone. This is Malik. And that little explorer in the grass is Ava. We've heard a few things. But honestly, we saw the article about you before we even bought the house. You made us feel safe to come here." Elena was speechless for a moment. Then she nodded, her chest tightening with emotion. Not because of what they said, but because of what it meant. What she had started was no longer just a response to pain. It had become a beacon. Later that afternoon, a neighborhood gathering formed on the clubhouse lawn. There were folding chairs, lemonade, and a bounce house, courtesy of Harriet and a few enthusiastic parents. It wasn't official or formal, just people, talking, mingling, existing together without walls between them. The listening circle had inspired a broader effort, the Community Reimagined Project. It focused on restoring not just policies, but relationships. Elena stood beside Jasper as kids played nearby. "You did something rare," he said. "You changed the rules and the culture. Most people only ever do one." "I didn't do it alone," Elena replied. "You did enough to make others believe they could." A local news crew arrived just as the sun began to dip low, bathing the neighborhood in golden light. They weren't there to chase scandal. They wanted a follow-up, a story not of outrage, but of rebuilding. They interviewed Harriet, now a neighborhood icon. They spoke to the new residents. And then they asked Elena for a few words. She hesitated, but Madeline nudged her forward. So she stepped up, faced the camera, and said, "I moved here hoping for peace. What I found was a system built to keep people like me silent. But silence is a choice. and so is kindness. If there's anything this community has learned, it's that fences don't keep us safe. Understanding does. This is just the beginning. We're not perfect, but we're trying. And for the first time, that's enough. The anchor smiled, and the camera light dimmed. Cheers rose from the lawn. Madeline ran toward the bounce house, and for a long moment, Elena simply watched her daughter fly upward, laughing, fearless, free. And that was when it hit her. Not all revolutions come with fire. Some come with flowers, some with sunrises, and some with the quiet decision to say, this is not how it has to be. Whispering Pines had once tried to shut her out. Now it was blooming. In my view, the ending of this story is not just satisfying, it's necessary. It doesn't offer a fairy tale fix, but rather a deeply earned transformation. Elena didn't win because she shouted the loudest or sought revenge. She won because she stood firm in her values, refused to be silenced, and empowered others to do the same. Her strength wasn't rooted in anger, but in integrity, patience, and the unwavering love she had for her daughter and community. The fact that Whispering Pines didn't just remove a corrupt board, but redefined what kind of neighborhood it wanted to be, that's the true heart of the story. The final scene, with laughter replacing fear and sunflowers, offered as peace instead of apologies, represents something profound. Change is possible, even in places designed to resist it. This ending reminds us that justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it grows quietly, seed by seed, in the soil of persistence. And when it blooms, it doesn't just heal the wounds of the past, it plants a better future.